Visnujana Maharaj, 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 3rd day of April.
Jaura Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janna Balaba Giribadari Gopi Janna Balaba Giribadari Yasoda Nandana Raja Janna Randana 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 Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janna Balaba Giribadari Gopi Janna Balaba Yasoda Nandana Raja Janna Randana 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 Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaurada Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Kunja Bihari Jaurada Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Jayam Vishnupada Paramananda Paragraph Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Kori Bhai Shri ki, Shri Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki, Prem Ji Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakti Vrinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopina Sham Kundara Kundiri Govardhan ki jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai, Shri Navadvip Dham ki jai, Jamuna Mai ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Jalangi Mai ki jai, Shrimati Tulsi Devi ki jai, Gaur Pimananda Hari Hari Bol, Gaur Bhakti Vrinda ki jai, Radha Madhava ki jai. Glories to the assembled Lord. All glories to the assembled Lord. All glories to the assembled Lord. All glories Shri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to the Lord. Nana Shastra Vicharino Kanipano Sadhanma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Saranya Karo Radha Krishna Padara Vinda Bhajana Nandin Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Kujago Shri Jiva Bhotalako. Offer our respectful obeisances unto the six Goswamis, namely Shri Sanatana Goswami, Shri Goswami, Shri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Shri Raghunath Das Goswami, Shri Jiva Goswami, and Shri Gopal Bhatta Goswami. or a very expert at scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles, for the benefit of all human beings. Thus they are honored all over the three worlds, and they are worth taking shelter of because they are absorbed in the mood of the gopis and are engaged in the transcendental loving service of Sri Radha and Krishna. So, the past 3 days we've discussed the first stages of devotional service, the characteristics of devotional service, some offenses to be avoided in devotional service, and today we'll discuss some of the techniques of devotional service. Page 89. The beginning of Krishna consciousness and devotional service is hearing, in Sanskrit called Shravanam. All people should be given the chance to come and join devotional parties so that they may hear. This hearing is very important for progressing in Krishna consciousness. When one links his ears to give oral reception to the transcendental vibrations, he can quickly become purified and cleansed in the heart. Lord Chaitanya has affirmed that this hearing is very important. It cleanses the heart of the contaminated soul so that he becomes quickly qualified to enter into devotional service and to understand Krishna consciousness. Hearing is the source of inspiration. Just like when you hear about some adventurous personality. Just like when you were young, you heard about Davy Crockett and so many adventurous personalities there were. Sinbad the Sailor. And these things filled your mind with inspiration. You see, your mother read you fairy stories about great princes and princesses and happily forever after, although no one had any experience of that. Still, all the stories always ended, and they lived happily forever after. So by hearing, all of us became inspired in our childhood, you see, towards some fantastic goal in life. You see, of course, gradually as you grow up, you find out that your life is going to be dull like everyone else's. That you're not going to become Jim Boy, you're not going to become Sinbad the Sailor, and there's not going to be any happily forever after. You see? And there's going to be no prince who comes to save you. You see? So, hearing in the material world, although it gives inspiration, the inspiration is under the modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. We were speaking the other day how these modes infect our consciousness. Just like inspiration in the mode of goodness is just like when you go into a forest and you feel very inspired towards that quiet, lonely place. You see, this is inspiration in the mode of goodness. It doesn't last very long. You see, again you come back from the forest into the city for some other type of enjoyment. See? In the city, they become inspired by the relationship of man and woman and impressing one another. The whole business in the cities and in the communities is the modes of passion, inspiration in the mode of passion. Everyone's trying to impress the opposite sex with what they possess or what they can influence with. And in the mode of ignorance, everyone is inspired, as we mentioned the other day, by a bottle of whiskey or by worshipping ghosts and spirits. These seances, this whole occult philosophy of the young people today is inspiration in the mode of ignorance. And when people take up witchcraft and they take up worshipping ghosts and spirits, this is all inspiration in the mode of ignorance. So ignorance, passion, and goodness, these are things we take inspiration from and perform our activities by their influence. But hearing about Krishna and his glorious pastimes, hearing about the happily forever after of Radha and Krishna and the actual prince who comes to save all living entities, Krishna, this type of inspiration will not go away. This is the first clue in Krishna consciousness that one receives after he hears sufficiently, coming into association with devotees. He may come to classes in the evening, or he may come to a Sunday feast, or he may talk with a devotee for hours one day. And by hearing from the devotees of the Lord, especially the pure devotees of the Lord, by reading Prabhupada's books, one may get his book, and he'll become inspired by this goal of life. When you hear how Narada Muni achieved his spiritual body, how his spiritual body, all of his senses became separately enlivened for serving the Lord, and he could not distinguish between himself and the Lord simultaneously. When you hear the glories of the spiritual realm, how magnificent it is, how wonderful are all the exchanges of love, your mind will become inspired, you see. But the difference is that this inspiration will not go away, like the material inspiration, you see. Nor will you be let down by the practice of day-by-day living, you see. day by day living in the material world becomes hackneyed, and therefore the inspiration is lost very quickly. Just like a man meets a woman, they become inspired by one another, they get married, but then by the day-by-day activities, the inspiration becomes worn, you see, and it becomes hackneyed, you see, and they're looking for some new inspiration, you see. But the spiritual inspiration is such that every time you come to Mangal Arati, there'll be more inspiration. Every time the curtains open and the deities are dressed, you'll think it's brand new, you see. The inspiration will not dwindle, it won't become hackneyed, as is the principle of material existence, the saturation principle of material existence. The mind has a saturation point. Just like if you had to sit in one classroom in a school all day, you'd become very bored because there's nothing going on there that can ultimately satisfy your mind. You see, the mind is looking for an unlimited reservoir of inspiration. You see, or if you had to be with one person all day long, you couldn't do it. You see, because the mind can never be satisfied by the limitations of material relationships. You see. So we're looking for some object, some atmosphere, some relationship that can ultimately satisfy the ever-increasing desire of the mind for inspiration. That is deity worship. You see, that is chanting Hare Krishna. That is tasting prasadam. We eat the same prasadam day after day after day, but the inspiration becomes more and more intense. You see, years go by, the inspiration becomes more and more intense, if one is actually following the principles and taking to the process. See? So by hearing the very beginning principle of Krishna consciousness, you'll become inspired. Just like some of you, you've been chanting Hare Krishna before you came to the movement, and finally one day you asked, well, what is Krishna? And someone pointed to a picture or to the deity and said, that's Krishna. And you thought, what? You mean Krishna is a person? And then you start to hear, yes, Krishna is a person, but not like you and me. He's an unlimited person. You have a little beauty, he has unlimited beauty. You have a little knowledge, he has unlimited knowledge. You have a little wealth, he has unlimited wealth, unlimited strength, unlimited fame, unlimited renunciation. And by hearing this, you become inspired to understand Krishna, to establish your relationship with Krishna. So hearing is the basic principle of Krishna consciousness because it gives you the inspiration by which to act in Krishna consciousness. In other words, when you've heard sufficiently, your intelligence becomes inspired and you agree, yes, I must act in such a way as to find Krishna, as to enter into my relationship with Krishna. I must act that way. And that is the second stage of devotional service, when after hearing you agree to act on what you've heard. You see? Also, hearing works also as far as purifying us, because we hear that it's wrong to slaughter animals, that you'll have to suffer birth after birth, reactions for every hair on the back of the animal you have to suffer. You hear that abortion is wrong, that illicit sex life is wrong, intoxication is wrong because it produces reactions. So by hearing the laws of karma, you also become inspired to be a responsible human being. Responsible human beings means that a human being has to ask, what is the reaction of my action? If you do anything without first considering what the reaction is going to be, you're irresponsible. Just like sometimes people, they see us chanting in the street, and they complain, oh, you're all irresponsible. But we say, no, you're irresponsible. Because you don't consider what the reactions of your activities are. We know what the reaction of our standing here in the street chanting is. That we're going to develop our love for God, and everyone who hears is going to be reminded of their love for God. You see? Therefore, we're acting responsibly by coming out and chanting. You see? But you don't know why you're walking into the store to buy some meat or some nonsense, what the reaction is going to be. Therefore, you're irresponsible because you cannot answer me when I ask you what the reaction of your actions are. You make this simple formula. You ask anyone, do you know what the reaction of abortion is? Do you know what the reaction of illicit sex is? Do you know what the reaction of intoxication is? They'll say no. That's why it's going on in the world, because there's no information about the laws of karma. You see? A mother tells her little boy or little daughter that you shouldn't engage in illicit sex life, and the child says, why? And the mother says, well, because you may have a child and you're not old enough to take care of it. Oh, no, mother, it's all right now. We have this pill. Simply by taking this pill, there's no more any problem. We won't have children and we can enjoy it. So the mother has to scratch her brain and think of something else. So she says, well, if you do this, then psychologically you'll be messed up, and later on so many things will happen. Oh, no, mother, it's all right. We have our psychologists, and our psychiatrists, and they can work it all out so that when we grow up, we'll be straightened out by their science. You see? So you don't have to worry, Mother. We can do whatever we like. You see? So with simply moral principles from dogma, without any reason behind it, parents are trying to control their children, and the children are simply rejecting it. You see? Slapping them in the face. You see? They're not satisfied with this dogma that I should do it just because you say so. They want to have some reason. They want to understand the laws of karma. You see? So when you hear these laws of karma, what the actual reactions are, then you act responsible. Because you can see the reactions all around you. Some living entity is being born crippled. Some living entity is being aborted within the womb. Some living entity is having some horrible disease. Some living entity is being slaughtered. These things aren't going on by chance. They're reactions of previous life's activities. And when this information is explained to a sane man, he can see, yes, the reactions are going on all around me. I should be careful how I act. So hearing is very important. It gives us the basis for Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada goes on to state, in the Garuda Purana, the stress on hearing is expressed very nicely. It is said there, quote, the state of conditioned life in the material world is just like a man lying unconscious, having been bitten by a snake. This is because both such unconscious states can be ended by the sound of a mantra. When a man is snake bitten, he does not die immediately, but first becomes unconscious and remains in a comatose condition. Anyone who is in the material world is also sleeping. He is ignorant of the actual self or his actual duty and his relationship with God. So materialistic life means that one is bitten by the snake of Maya illusion. And thus, without any Krishna consciousness, he is almost dead. Now, the so-called dead man bitten by a snake can be brought back again to life by the chanting of some mantra. There are expert chanters of these mantras who can perform this feat. Similarly, one can be brought back into Krishna consciousness from the deadly unconscious state of material life by hearing of the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare. In the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 29th chapter, 37th verse, the importance of hearing of the pastimes of the Lord is stated by Shukadev Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. Quote, my dear king, one should stay at a place where the great acharyas, holy teachers, speak about the transcendental activities of the Lord. And one should give oral reception to the nectarine river flowing from the moon-like faces of such great personalities. If someone eagerly continues to hear such transcendental sounds, then certainly he will become freed from all material hunger, thirst, fear, and lamentation, as well as all illusions of material existence. This was actually the case of Maharaj Parikshit, that he sat down for 7 days without sleeping, without eating, without even drinking water. And he was fully satisfied simply by hearing the nectarine pastimes of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So one may wonder how simply by hearing all desires can be satisfied. You see? But this is because one who has identified himself as spirit soul, he realizes that the demands of the body are not his demands. That life does not depend upon eating or drinking water or sleeping. That life depends upon one's realization of his identity as the eternal servant of Krishna. When one has realized this, when he's heard sufficiently, acted upon it, and thereby realized it, then all material demands become nil. Now, we can't artificially expect to come to this state, but by the same process of hearing, we're gradually purified of all misconceptions of ourselves so that we can come to the stage of Atma-bi, and we understand totally what is the self, what is the real nature of life. That life is not a bulk of chemicals interacting. The reason we think in this way is because from our very childhood, as soon as we came out of our mother's womb, the first experience we got was the heaving of our lungs. You see? Therefore, from the very beginning, we've thought life depended upon this heaving of the lungs. You see? Therefore, you can imagine how attached you are to that movement of the lungs. It's been going on from the very birth. See, at the time of death, that's one of the most horrible things, is when your lungs fill up with blood and there's no more breathing. Then immediately you think, oh, I'm dying. You see? But life does not depend upon the movement of the lungs. You see? Also, we've been eating from our very childhood, therefore we think life depends upon eating. You see? We think, oh, if I don't eat, I'm going to die. See, if I don't drink water, I'm going to die. But actually, life does not depend upon these things. And one who realizes that, he is free from the material engagement. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also recommended this process of hearing as a means of self-realization in the present age of Kali. In this age, it is very difficult to follow thoroughly the regulated principles and studies of the Vedas, which are formally recommended. However, if one gives oral reception to the sound vibrated by great devotees and acharyas, that alone will give him relief from all material contamination. Therefore, it is the recommendation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that one should simply hear from the authorities who are actually devotees of the Lord. Hearing from professional men will not help. If we hear from those who are actually self-realized, then the nectarine rivers, like those which are flowing on the moon planet, will flow into our ears. This is a metaphor used in the above verse. Any questions about hearing?
Maybe you know something about it, Maharaj, but I think it was in the fourth or third canto, I read something about a snake which is gulping the life air. Did you read that? There's a symbolic allure of a snake, that's the spinal cord, which actually gulps the life air. And this is the most subtle attachment to the material body.
Yeah. It's a fact. The living soul is contained within 4 chambers of the heart, and there are 4 subtle air, not air like this air, but subtle airs, prana, which contaminate the soul's consciousness. The soul itself never contacts matter, but the consciousness of the soul contacts these airs. You see? And by his consciousness, he's implicated. Just like, for example, sunlight. Sunlight can be filtered by a red filter or a blue filter, and therefore the sunlight becomes perverted or colored. But the sun planet isn't colored. Similarly, the soul is not colored by the material elements, but the consciousness of the soul becomes colored. Impediments to hearing are basically fear of one's own personal spiritual identity. Maya fools us. Maya says, oh, don't listen to that. You're never going to get out of my clutches. You've always been my servant, and you're always going to be my servant. So there's no need to hear about spiritual bodies in the spiritual world, because you're never going to achieve it. This is Maya. You see? Maya cheats us. Maya tells us that we can't become a liberated soul. Actually, we can become a liberated soul. You see? But we're afraid of our own personal spiritual identity. This infects all of us. Then the other one is material attachment, keeps us from hearing. And the other one is, the frustration from hearing so many different spiritual views and different religions, etc., and therefore thinking that everyone is relative. I might as well have my own opinion rather than hear from someone else. Frustration. So frustration, fear, and material attachment. These are the impediments. Hurdles, they're called. And to overcome these hurdles, you have to get the mercy of a pure devotee of the Lord. You have to become inspired by his associate. It's in Bhagavad Gita. 410. Purport to 410. Therefore, the best thing is to be aware of the etiquette before the deity. Then that will help you to realize that the deity is a person. Oh. That will come gradually as our senses become purified. That will come. You can't artificially think of Krishna. You have to be purified to think of Krishna. So think of how to become purified. Reading, studying.
Sometimes we're feeling uninspired to hear. We feel like we have no actual taste in hearing. But by mechanically hearing, it's still effective. By forcing oneself to hear, although it's like making one extra.
Yeah, that's called a sense of duty. That in the beginning you were inspired to hear, and then you've heard it. I'm not this body. For years you've heard it, and you still haven't realized it. So now we're hearing out of a sense of duty. So gradually, by that sense of duty, Krishna will be impressed that you're serious, and he'll give you the intelligence to realize. So yes, out of a sense of duty, one should perform all the devotional principles, even if he doesn't feel inspired.
We're talking about inspiration in 3 moments, and it's not discussed like that in Bhagavad Gita. Does that come from Bhagavatam?
No, it's there in Bhagavatam. That everyone, especially in the 18 chapters, it describes how the living entities are inspired by these different modes to different types of faith. Those in the mode of ignorance worship ghosts and spirits. Like that. It also describes places in the mode of goodness, places in the mode of passion, places in the mode of... Some way or other, if someone establishes in his mind his continuous relationship with Krishna, this relationship is called remembrance. About this remembrance, there is a nice statement in the Vishnu Purana where it is said, simply by remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all living entities become eligible for all kinds of auspiciousness. Therefore, let me always remember the Lord who is unborn and eternal. In the Padma Purana, the same remembrance is explained as follows. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Lord Krishna, because if someone remembers him, either at the time of death or during his span of life, he becomes free from all sinful reactions. So when you hear Krishna book, when you hear Srimad Bhagavatam, you're remembering Krishna. Like that. Also when you hear Hare Krishna, you're remembering Krishna. 92. Any questions about remembrance?
This last sentence where it says, if one remembers the need at the time of death and during his death must be free from all sinful reactions. Now, I understand that sinful reactions take several forms. Some of the sinful reactions are actually the desire seeds and fructified human goodness. And yet, certainly all of us during the day remember Krishna at one time or other. Yet we still maintain our at least the desire seed. Does that mean that at that point we're free from all sinful reactions, we don't commit any more sins? Not how we think. We're simply the sin we're committing after that point that we're suffering.
Well, because of past bad habit, one sometimes by bad association falls down, even though he's engaged in devotional service to the Lord. So one may argue, why does that past bad habit still affect him if he's been chanting and hearing? Right? So, the reason is that in the beginning stages of Krishna consciousness, as Krishna says, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So if you totally surrender unto Krishna, then you're totally free from all sinful reactions. You see, and all past sinful thoughts, desire seeds, etc., are all wiped away if you totally surrender. You see, but if you only partially surrender, if you harbor these desire seeds, then what can Krishna do? You see, he reciprocates, but he can only reciprocate in the measure of your surrender. Those things that you harbor, those things that you keep, those desires, sinful desires, those you still have to contend with. Meditation. Meditation means to engage the mind in thinking of the form of the Lord, of the qualities of the Lord, of the activities of the Lord, and of the service of the Lord. Meditation does not mean anything impersonal or void. According to Vedic literature, meditation is always on the form of Vishnu. In the Shringa Purana, there is a statement about meditation on the form of the Lord. It is said there, meditation focusing on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has been accepted as transcendental and beyond the experience of material pain and pleasure. By such meditation, even one who is grossly miscreant can be delivered from the sinful reactions of his life. So in other words, meditation means to engage the mind in thinking of the pastimes of the Lord, instructions of the Lord, qualities of the Lord, and the service of the Lord. In this way, the mind should be engaged, and one should practice controlling the mind by intelligence so that the mind does not degrade one. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, mind is our friend or it's our enemy. Mind which is attached to sense objects is the cause of bondage, and mind which is attached to Krishna is the cause of supreme liberation. You see? Therefore, we have to fix the mind, train the mind to think of the service of the Lord. That's the easiest. Qualities of the Lord, the instructions of the Lord, and the pastimes of the Lord, and nothing else. Any questions on meditation? Yes?
There's one question about meditating on the form of the Lord. I heard that the arti is actually supposed to be a meditation on the form of the Lord. Is that accepted?
Yes. When the arti ceremony is going on, you can watch the pujari offering the lamps, starting at the feet of the deity and going up the body of the deity. Every article that's offered, he first offers to the feet, and to the calves, and to the thighs, and to the waist, and to the shoulder, to the head of the deity. And that way, the pujari is meditating on the body of the deity. And you can also watch him offering those articles and meditate on the form of the Lord, starting with his lotus feet. The description of Krishna's body is there in the scripture, what his body is like. So if you've read that description, then when you look at the form of the deity, you can think in terms of scripture. You don't have to invent anything or make anything up in your mind. You just think in terms of scriptural description.
It's one of the 64 processes. Worship service to the deity. God in the bottom time, we should be doing meditation, lotus feet, regress up to lotus arms. So does that mean that we should try to remember Madhava through the day? We should nearby God and meditate on the lotus feet, or we should
Everything. There's no bar. You can meditate on everything. On page 81, there's another qualification, japa. When a mantra or hymn is chanted softly and slowly, that is called japa. The same mantra, when chanted loudly, is called kirtan. For example, the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. When uttered very softly, only for one's own hearing, is called japa. The same mantra, when chanted loudly for being heard by all others, is called kirtan. The Maha Mantra can be used for japa and kirtan also. When japa is practiced, it is for the personal benefit of the chanter. But when kirtan is performed, it is for the benefit of all others who may hear. Any question about japa?
I've been told by if your mind is agitated and it's mortified, it should be pronounced loudly.
Yes, it's bona fide. But you should all be careful when you're chanting your rounds that you pronounce the mantra carefully. It should always be audibly perfect. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Like that. Now, tilak, tulsi beads, and flower garlands. In the Padma Purana, there is a statement describing how a Vaishnava should decorate his body. It's page 74. With tilak and beads. Persons who put tilak, beads on the neck, who mark 12 places of their body as Vishnu temples, with Vishnu's symbolic representations, the 4 items held in the 4 hands of Lord Vishnu, conch, mace, disc, and lotus. And who have Vishnu tilak on their forehead are to be understood as the devotees of Lord Vishnu in this world. Their presence makes the world purified, and anywhere they remain, they make that place as good as Vaikuntha. A similar statement is in the Skanda Purana, which says, persons who are decorated with tilak or gopi chandan, a kind of clay resembling fuller's earth, which is produced in certain quarters of Vrindavan, and who mark their bodies all over with the holy names of the Lord, and on whose neck and breast there are tulsi beads, are never approached by the Yamadutas. So here's some of the importance of why we mark our body with tilak, or the names of the Lord and the markings of the Lord, and wearing the neck beads, tulsi beads, etc. Any question on this?
Since 12 places, there's 13 places we mark. One, two, three,
13. Well, excluding the top of the head, probably. Dancing before the deity. In the Dwarka Mahatmya, the importance of dancing before the deity is stated by Lord Krishna as follows. A person who is jubilant spirit, who feels profound devotional ecstasy while dancing before me, and who manifests different features of bodily expression, can burn away all the accumulated sinful reactions he has stocked up for many, many thousands of years. So in other words, one should dance before the deity very jubilantly, even if one doesn't have the symptoms of ecstasy, namely tears in the eyes, shivering in the body. Still he should dance before the deity on the order of the spiritual master. You see, one should not think, well, until I become advanced enough, I won't dance before the deity. No, one should follow the orders of the spiritual master, the desire of the spiritual master, and dance very jubilantly and nicely before the deity. See? And this will increase your enthusiasm for devotional service. If you stand in the background and don't dance jubilantly, then you won't be able to pick up the desire to join in Kirtan without any thought of time, space, circumstances, etc. See? The nice thing is when you lose yourself in the Kirtan, that you feel all this chanting can go on and on and on and on and on. That's the nicest. Question about dancing before the deity?
Srila Prabhupada said in Australia, that if you dance, he said, even if you don't feel like you do it, even artificially, he said, like this, he said, then you feel help advancing on the body.
Yes. Going to the temple of Vishnu or to places of pilgrimage, page 76. It is stated in the Puranas, persons who attempt to visit the holy places of pilgrimage, like Vrindavan, Mathura, or Dwarka, are actually glorified. By such traveling activities, they can pass over the desert of material existence. In the Hari Bhakti Suddhadoya, there is a statement about the benefit of visiting the temples of Lord Krishna. As we have explained previously, in Vrindavan, Mathura, and Dwarka, the system is that all the devotees take advantage of visiting various temples situated in those holy places. It is stated in the Hari Bhakti Suddhadoya, persons who are impelled by pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness and who therefore go to see the deities of Vishnu in the temple will surely get relief from entering again into the prison house of a mother's womb. The conditioned soul forgets the trouble of living within the mother's womb during birth, but it is very painful and terrible experience. In order to make an escape from the material condition, one is advised to visit a temple of Vishnu with devotional consciousness. Then one can very easily get out of the miserable condition of material birth. It's very nice instruction. Any question?
Somebody that just go down in front of the deity, whenever they go again to the material world, it's on the other side going down in front of the deity. And everyone looks like just somebody just come and go down.
Yeah. At the end of the chapter, Prabhupada states that it may seem like this is very wonderful, how this can happen. Prabhupada says that this is true in certain circumstances, but not in all circumstances. But there are examples of just by one activity, one becomes completely liberated. But one shouldn't think that, well, I'll just do that and nothing else, and therefore I'll become liberated. Prayers. According to great learned scholars, the whole Bhagavad Gita contains many authorized prayers, especially in the 11th chapter, where Arjuna prays to the universal form of the Lord. Similarly, in the Gautamiya Tantra, all the verses are called prayers. Again, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are hundreds of prayers to the Lord. So a devotee should select some of these prayers for his recitation. In the Skanda Purana, the glories of these prayers are stated as follows, quote, devotees whose tongues are decorated always with prayers to the Lord, Krishna, are always given respect even by the great saintly persons and sages. And such devotees are actually worshipable by the demigods. So we should memorize some prayers, and with feeling, we should offer prayers before the deity, for the spiritual master, and to all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. In this way we can establish ourselves on a platform of sincerity always by offering prayers to the Lord. So these are some of the practical engagements in devotional service. We discussed hearing, remembering, meditating, chanting japa, offering prayers, etc. So there's a whole chapter about these things. You can read them one by one yourselves and get a good idea